Ahead and turn those lights up. I want to give out a couple things. We know we got people on the way, but I'm happy to see the faces that are here, so I'm pretty excited about that. A lot of times we'll do subjects here on Wednesday nights that, like this subject, or last time it was on vaping when Kim came in, it's going to be hard for you to find those different things unless you're part of a hospital system or something like that. And sometimes that costs money. So we just want to provide that here. We have another ministry called, Health Matters. And it's not to preach at people, to tell you what you should or should not eat. But once knowledge is presented, right, we get to make choices. Yes. And it's best to make those choices in preventative care. You ever been in a spot, where you're like, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, and it's like, oh man, if I'd have known, I woulda. Well, we just talked in a situation where someone that we love dearly is in the hospital, and it looks like it's the liver having problems, not only from blood sugar issues, but also like cirrhosis, and they don't drink. And it's a very common thing. And so people die in those situations, and knowledge is power, right? Amen? Amen? All right, I wanted to let you know, too, we have advertisements out and around the corner, but we also have something called the AFCM Faith Aid. I've had a lot of people ask me, where is this found in the Bible, or where can I get scriptures on a certain thing or whatever? You can look them up just by looking under a subject here, and it'll give you a whole bunch of scriptures, like on healing, for instance. Excuse me. Anyways, it'll talk about healing, and then it'll tell you where you can go. And that kind of shortens it for you, especially if you're new to the kingdom and new to Christianity. It's going to be hard for you to just pop something open and know where everything is, right? All right. Well, I think we're going to get started, even though we got some more still on the way. Kim, why don't you kind of come on up here, and let's give her a hand. It's such a privilege. She's an RN, and we're going to milk her brain tonight. So, all right.
All right. I just wanted to tell everybody thank you so much for letting me once again come and speak with you guys. This is not a punitive discussion, okay? If you have questions, by all means ask. This is not to shame people. This is just information. And years ago, when I first started in nursing, I've been a nurse for 24 years, there was a lot of public outreach, right? There was a lot of different things that they did in the community to talk to people. But when budget cuts come in, those are the first things that go. So there's also no money in preventative medicine. So hospitals are businesses, and that's just very honest about that. So apply that where you think that's necessary. So tonight I'm going to be talking about blood sugar. Pastor Mary invited me back to speak, and how what we eat affects you. So with that being said, you can go to the next slide. So how does your body regulate blood sugar? So insulin reduces your body's blood sugar level and provides cells glucose. Cells uses glucose for energy, right? When the blood sugars are low, your pancreas releases something called glucagon. And glucagon's main function is to instruct the liver to release stored glucose. Hypoglycemia is the state of too little glucose in your blood sugar, and every person in this room has felt that before. You're outside, you're working, you went on a long walk, you get the shakes, you need to eat something. That's hypoglycemia. People all have their own different little thresholds, but there is a range. Usually when your blood sugar gets a little bit below 60, you start to feel it. Hyperglycemia is the state of having too much blood sugar. When people have a lot of blood sugar problems and their blood sugar is high, they build up a tolerance. So the highest blood pressure or blood sugar I've seen on an actual living person was 1,700. And they were in a coma and probably had been laying for days. And I don't know, I see them in the ER, we stabilize them, we ship them, I never hear what happens. So young person, but 1,700 is pretty high. When you get up into that range, you are damaging everything, including your brain, specifically your brain. So hyperglycemia, really they want your blood sugar between 60 and 100. So once you start getting past, they'll give you a little grace, 100, 125. Once you get past that 125 mark, they're watching you, right? So cells use glucose as a source of immediate energy to keep your body running. That optimal range, like I said, is just 100 or 60 to 100, and that's actually lowered over the past, I'd say past 5 to 10 years with research. They felt that people should keep their a little tighter control on their blood sugar. Next slide. So what happens when we eat? So functioning body tissue are continuously absorbing this glucose from your bloodstream. This is completely involuntary. You don't have to think about it. Your body just automatically does it. You don't have to think about, well, I wonder if I should eat this and then if it's going to go to this cell over here. You're designed to automatically function on your own. So non-diabetic people can eat carbohydrates and circulating blood glucose that replaces your blood glucose about 10 minutes after eating and continues for about 2 hours. So if you're somebody who doesn't have diabetes, you can keep your blood sugar up by eating normally. To eat huge meals is usually when people really struggle. And what I've noticed is what happens is I don't have diabetes, but I'll eat, and 2 hours later I'm kind of hungry. What really the body's kind of designed to do is eat small amounts throughout the day. This whole big meal thing all the time doesn't work for the human body. Worked for people in the farm life, and I grew up on a farm, so we had some big meals. But then you're going long periods of time without food. So during the first phase, release of insulin happens about 5 minutes after ingestion of food, and it lasts up to hours. Glucose that is not absorbed through the intestine into the bloodstream is then stored into your liver. Who knew that your liver actually stored sugar in it? So when you're an alcoholic and you're drinking a lot of alcoholic beverages, they are loaded with sugar, absolutely loaded with it. Because in order to make alcohol, you have to ferment something, and in order to ferment something, you have to put an insane amount of sugar in it and then take away the oxygen source, and then it starts this fermentation process. But your body recognizes sugar. It doesn't recognize fermentation. So that's something to think about. When blood sugar falls about 2 hours after you eat, we call that the postprandial after meal blood sugar. And you ever wonder why you're hungry 2 hours after you eat, and you're like, oh, I ate a whole bunch of food, now I need to eat again. Well, that's why. And for me, I can feel it about 2:30 in the afternoon. I'm like, oh man, I need a nap, just 20 minutes, and I just need something to eat. And it's been like that for a long time. So I try to eat something healthy, like an apple, right? A little sugar in an apple, but kind of smooths me over. All right, next slide. Foods that fuel the body. Glucose, what exactly is glucose? Anything that can be broken down into a simple sugar. Starches, breads, noodles, potatoes, rice, blood sugar, or sugar, pop, soda, fruit, anything. So I had a little patient, I'll tell you guys patient stories as I go along here. The other day, and this lady brought her significant other into work and in the ER, and she's like, I just put him on an all plant-based, diet to get his blood sugar under control. And I'm like, all right, it's 485, so I'm dying to know what these plants are. Well, she's like, rice is a plant, and so are potatoes, and yes, they are, and they are full of starch. So all those starches break down into simple sugars because your body can't use long-chain sugars. So a carbohydrate is a bunch of sugars stuck together. A simple sugar is just one of those little pieces broken off and it goes right into your cell. Fats, butter, those sort of things, oils, your body uses those for fuel. Protein, eggs, meat, fish, legumes. Peanut butter is not a nut, it's actually a legume for those of you. Legumes are lentils, peanuts, those sort of things. They're usually generally higher in protein. So I'm a fan of those because they're good things to snack on and they don't really mess with your blood sugar as much. So I'm also a fan of eggs. There is not one single meat out there that carries every single amino acid except for an egg. An egg is the perfect protein. And they used to be cheap. They're getting cheaper again. So there's hope. There's hope for us yet. All right, next slide. So insulin is responsible for the decrease of your blood sugar. But the hormones of the pancreas are actually more than one hormone. Glucagon is responsible for the increase of blood sugar when it's low. So little kids don't produce as much glucagon like we adults do. So when I see kids that are sick, I'll actually feed them sugar because their liver doesn't have the capacity to store sugar like we do. And kids have high metabolisms. So popsicles, those sort of things, when kids are sick, they get dehydrated easy. Those work well. Amylin, it helps increase satiety and satisfaction and that full feeling after you're done eating to prevent overeating. It also helps slow your stomach contents from emptying. And then somatostatin, helps the pancreas alternate using insulin and glucagon. So they don't talk a lot about these other ones. When you go to the doctor, all you hear about is insulin, 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 insulin. But these have a very important role. They also can be extremely caustic. If you have pancreatitis and your pancreas is inflamed and it's overproducing these, you are chemically scalding your stomach and the outer part of your stomach. So people who drink alcohol or use some of those, there's certain creatinine muscle building type of protein shakes I've seen people use, they will wind up having pancreatitis from it because it's overstimulating their pancreas. And then what's happening is they're scalding all of their internal organs. It's extremely painful. And pancreatitis can be very dangerous, especially if you get something in there called a pancreatic pseudocyst. And what happens is you're actually getting a collection of infection right in your pancreas. So we can't live without our pancreas. We can fake it, but it's never going to be the same. So if you had your pancreas taken out, they might give you some pancreatic enzymes to take, sort of the same, but not really, and then they'll give you insulin. But nothing functions in your body like the way it was made. God designed it in a way that it functions so perfect that man can never come back and make it the same. So even with all the technology we have now, like there's certain insulin pumps that you can put on people and they monitor your blood sugar, it goes right to your phone, everybody knows what their blood sugar is. It's still not the same. It never does as good a job as what the human body does. Next slide. So a healthy liver stores up to 10% of its mass for glycogen stores or for glucose. Muscle stores about 1%. So when you're talking about people who are athletes on the bottom here and they're going to carb load, they're going to eat a bunch of carbohydrates before they go run that marathon, and they're going to pack that all into their liver because they're going to get out there on that runner's high, and then their blood sugar is going to drop, and glucagon's going to kick in, and their blood sugar is going to come back up. Even when you see people run, really good athletes that run marathons frequently, they will have spots where they can stop and get a little sip of water. They can get a little thing to stick under their tongue. That's all sugar to keep them going. So the liver takes this glucagon back to glucose when needed. But that is how it's stored. So that's a healthy looking liver. Next slide. So the total overall function of insulin is it turns on the uptake of glucose by insulin sensitive cells. It turns off the breakdown of glycogen by your liver. The storage of glucose in the form of glycogen in the liver and skeletal muscles and tissues, it also can turn that into fat. So that's part of what insulin does. It also can break down fat. So insulin's pretty important. The uptake of amino acids and the synthesis of protein is part of what insulin does. It's also part of what your pancreas does. If you can't break down that steak you ate into simple proteins, you can't use it in your body. So it can turn off the breakdown of protein just as well as it can turn it on. And the DNA synthesis. So that DNA synthesis is a fancy way to say we're going to make some new cells. So if you can't recreate yourself, and every minute that you're sitting here, you're losing cells and new cells are being made. If you can't do that, then you would basically start to decline. How do people get type 1 diabetes? So type 1 diabetes is mainly the disease of the younger people. You don't see people beyond 20s develop type 1 diabetes. They'd fall more in the type 2 category. So the 12-year-old that gets diabetes, that's type 1 diabetes. Okay, some of that's genetic. Some of it we don't know why. Sometimes a virus attacks your pancreas. That's an actual thing, and it shuts it off. And sometimes there's just no explanation as to why it happens. So the early in the disease, the existing insulin resistant can be counteracted by excess insulin secretion from beta cells. Beta cells live inside your pancreas in these little things called the islets of Langerhans. So when you eat sugar, those beta cells are all excited about it and they're going to do their job. So they try to address hyperglycemia. The hyperglycemia caused by insulin resistance is also met by hyperinsulinemia. So once that blood sugar gets so high and it's sitting up there, and your body's just trying to produce massive amounts of insulin, those beta cells are failing in type 1 diabetes. They can't keep up. So type 1 diabetes develops very young in life. I've seen kids as young as 4 or 5 years old have type 1 diabetes. And their parents will bring them into the emergency room. They're like, I don't know, little Johnny won't wake up. He's been drinking a ton of water. He's lost some weight. He doesn't look, and they don't look good because they're in a bad way. So beta cells begin to fail inside that pancreas, and then hyperglycemia can no longer be matched by the excess insulin secretion. So it just gets on this cascade, and it just starts going as fast as it can to produce as much insulin, and it burns itself out, basically. Next slide. So how do people develop type 2 diabetes? So for every maybe one person I've seen that's a type 1 diabetic, I probably see 20 people that are type 2 or more. Type 2 diabetes comes from all kinds of different factors that we can control. So that's kind of exciting because we have a little bit of say-so. Insulin resistance can develop in a person over many years before the appearance of type 2 diabetes. Many patients have body cells with decreased response to insulin known as insulin resistance. This means that for the same amount of circulating insulin, the skeletal muscles, liver, and your adipose, which is fat tissues, take up and metabolize less glucose than normal. If you are an insulin-resistant type 2 diabetic, I am giving you a lot of insulin. I have given people 100 units of insulin, and it's done nothing. 100 units of insulin on somebody who is your normal, everyday person, you'd be wiped out. Your blood sugar would be in the 20s. But their receptors on their cells don't know how to use insulin anymore. So when less glucose is available, the body uses free fatty acids. Cells are bathed in fatty acids. High levels of blood lipids decrease the effectiveness of insulin. Thus, high cholesterol and body fat, overweight, and obesity cause insulin resistance. And you can see it in our population in general. People will get overweight. Then they go to their doctor. Their doctor's like, well, I'm pre-diabetic. They'll tell them. Then they start on a little metformin, which is an oral pill for diabetes. And then they don't change anything in their lifestyle, and the cascade just keeps going, right? And they wind up on insulin, and they wind up with all these other problems because the longer you go in an insulin-resistant state, the more insulin-resistant you become. High levels of blood lipids decrease the effectiveness of insulin, thus high cholesterol and body fat, overweight. Oops, I read that, sorry. What I was gonna say about high cholesterol and body fat and people that are insulin resistant, this is a very nursing, gross note. I have drawn lots of people's blood, and if you go like this, the fat comes right up to the top. And sometimes I have done this on people who are really insulin resistant, and half of it's fat. Wow. And I think, how in the world can this possibly be happening? But that's a lot of fat in there, right? So physical inactivity has a similar effect. Sedentary, overweight, and obese people accumulate triglycerides in their muscle cells. This causes the cells to use fat rather than glucose to produce muscular energy, and physical inactivity and obesity increase insulin resistance. So now you'll see, like on the news right now, there's a certain, it's a week-long, it's a newer diabetic insulin shot that came out, and people just take a shot once a week, and that's how they control their blood sugar. And what we're seeing is a ton of people taking it that have never been diagnosed with diabetes, and they're losing a ton of weight on it. And I can guarantee you, when they're done taking it, they're gonna gain a ton of weight right back, and they're gonna probably be in worse shape than they were because they're tricking their body, and it's not teaching those cells what they need to be doing. So if any of you are doing that in here, stop it. It's not a good idea. Stop it. All right, next slide. Oops. I think that's the same slide, guys. There you go. So what happens when glucose is not used as fuel in the body and it is being fueled from fats and proteins? So you go to something called ketoacidosis. And people are, in the population now, nobody knew what ketoacidosis was 20 years ago. But then we get on all these high protein, high fat diets, and they're selling ketoacidosis strips, and everyone's peeing on the strip to see if they're ketotic and all these sort of things. What you're really doing is starving your body of glucose and forcing it to use fat to fuel itself. You can lose weight on that. I don't think people necessarily feel great on it, and I see other problems with it. And I don't really know how living off of meat and oils and fat is sustainable throughout your entire life. I mean, I feel like we're plant-based. We should eat plant-based foods, and we should eat lean meats and those sort of things. These acids are known as ketones. People begin to have excess urine, urine production, which is high in glucose. So when people have diabetes and they don't know it, that is one of the ways that we can tell that they do, because they will pee and it's super foamy because sugar all sticks together. And they'll be, they'll have people come in, they're like, yeah, I've been drinking and I drank 3 gallons of water today and all I do is pee. Well, you probably have diabetes. And it's your kidney's way of trying to flush itself out, because when you have to push blood through your body that is really viscous, the more sugar you have in there, the more viscous it is. So it's like pushing maple syrup through your body. You have to get that down. You're more prone to have strokes. You're more prone to have heart attacks, because that's how clots form. And it's sticky. Blood's sticky to begin with. But when you have a blood sugar of 500 or 600, you have really sticky blood. So that's your kidney's way of trying to do the right thing. And eventually, you see a lot of, remember diabetes, you see people going in and they'll wind up on dialysis. This is how that happens, because they didn't take care of that diabetes, or they caught it too late, and their kidneys are too fragile, or whatever the mixture is, and it can't filter anymore because we've pushed too many big cells of carbohydrates and sugars through there. Sugars are big, they're big cells in comparison to other things, and your kidneys have little tiny loops in them and they get all clogged up. So they're not meant to filter on that level. So you should never have sugar in your urine. That's never a good sign. Next slide. So the symptoms of ketoacidosis: excessive thirst, excessive urination, altered mental status, Kussmaul's breathing, which only a nurse would know, but I'll tell you, if you have somebody who is got the first 3 and they're panting like a dog and they're not very responsive, and they have a very distinct breathing pattern, it's super fast. The reason is because their blood is acidy. And so their respiratory system kicks over and says, if you're in metabolic acidosis, we'll call that, right? Your whole body's in metabolic acidosis. I'm going to put you in respiratory alkalosis. So you have alkaline coming in from someplace, because once you get your pH in your blood low, your heart will eventually stop. Like, it cannot shift stuff back and forth. So your heart is not designed, it's designed to be like 7.35 to 7.45 is a nice pH that your blood level likes. I've seen people who are like 6.8, 6.9, 6.7. You start getting into the 6s, you're going to have a cardiac arrest, because potassium and sodium and all the things that make your little blood vessels or your little muscles fire can't fire in that environment anymore. So people go into something called Kussmaul's breathing, and they'll breathe 45, 50 breaths a minute, and they're not because they're oxygen deprived. It's because their body's trying to blow off all the acid that's in their blood from being in ketoacidosis. It is truly a phenomenal thing, and they'll do it for days. So not only if you're diabetic and you're having all these problems and your altered level of consciousness or whatever, not only are you starving your cells and you're losing weight abnormally, but now you're just increasing all of this workload on your respiratory system. It's like running a marathon. And so you'll see those people just lose a ton of weight. Kussmaul's breathing is a latent sign. It's like later on in the game of diabetes. Fruity smelling breath or funny, weird smelling breath. You'll smell that on people who are diabetic. And then rapid unplanned weight loss. And when I say rapid unplanned weight loss, I mean like I just lost 50 pounds this month. And I did nothing different, because they're basically starving. They're starving in their own skin. Next. So ways high blood sugar is harmful to your body. So here's where America has fallen apart, right here, is the ways that our blood sugar is managed in the United States. So anybody who's been to the doctor in this last 5 years would most likely have what's called the glycosylated hemoglobin, or hemoglobin A1C. In the medical field, we're chasing this number around, right? We want you less than 7, preferably 6. That's the number. Doctors get kickback if they get their patients are under 6 and their triglycerides are under a certain number and their blood pressure's over here. And it's this whole big thing that charts get audited, and there's all these protocols on it. Because they find that once your hemoglobin A1C is greater than 7, that you're in the diabetic range. Now, the highest that I think the machine monitors is 15 or 16. And then after that, that's just like you've topped it out. You can't get the machine to go any higher than that. So glycosylated proteins trigger inflammatory reactions, which injures the lining of your blood vessels. So if you're constantly running with a high blood sugar, right, you have continuously inflamed your body. Inside the lumen of your vessels is smooth muscle. But once that becomes irritated, then your body tries to heal it and you have like this inflammatory response. Well, that can cause a whole nother cascade of problems. That's where blood clots start coming in because your body's like, oh, I'm going to go heal this spot, and we start developing blood clots there. That's where people start developing heart disease and those sort of things. High intracellular glucose encourages the growth of unnecessary blood vessels and leads to vessel constriction. It thickens the basement membranes and releases pro-inflammatory molecules. This is the foundation for atherosclerosis or heart disease. So when I was first in nursing school, they're like, you have to tell your patients that they can't have high blood sugar because they're all gonna have heart attacks and blah, blah, blah. But I didn't know why. So why would anybody listen to something if you didn't know the why behind it? I wouldn't listen to it, so I had to find out. So this is where it all begins. This is how, like, when people are diabetic and they have problems in their legs and their feet and those sort of things with circulation, and they start getting sores. All of a sudden they get a sore on their toe and it never heals. There's not enough blood supply there. It can't get in there to fix that. So they don't even realize that it's happened. And by this point, when you start having those sort of problems, it's hard to revascularize that. It's hard to get in there and fix any of it. You can, but it's just super hard. Excessively high blood sugar reduces the effectiveness of intracellular activities that protect against antioxidants and oxidative stress. So you don't hear too much about antioxidants anymore in the news or conversations, but they're still a thing. And foods that are high in antioxidants are probably the best foods that you can eat because it's helping your body keep your immune system where it belongs. This is how neuropathy begins, though. This leads to oxidative damage, especially to your neurons. So when we're dealing with diabetic people, I've seen people cut their finger off and everything. They don't feel it because their nerves are done. They don't feel anymore because the sugars have, and the oxidative properties of all the problems with high blood sugar have wrecked that response. So they could put their hand on a hot burner and they'd never feel it. Same thing with, they're always telling people, check your toes, check this, check that. I've seen diabetics will come into the ER and they're like, oh, yeah, I've had fevers, I've had this. Well, they've got something stuck in the bottom of their foot for who knows how long, but they didn't feel it because their neurons no longer are functioning like they should. Next slide. So risk factors for developing type 2 diabetes. So the major risk factor for developing type 2 diabetes includes obesity, physical inactivity, unhealthy diet, hyperglycemia, stress, and chronic inflammation. So it's one thing to be a little bit overweight, and I'm not fat shaming anybody. I'm not here to pick on people. I could stand to lose 20 pounds myself. It's worse for you to yo-yo diet and go up and down and lose 50 pounds, gain 50 pounds. That's really hard on your body. Yeah, we should all try to keep our BMI down, our body mass index. A great way to do that is not to be physically inactive. And if you want people to lower their blood sugar, the first thing I tell them is start walking. If all you can walk is 5 minutes a day on a treadmill, do it. Because you're going to retrain how your whole body is firing. And it's going to start shifting some things around in there so you can lose weight. And instead of that hamster wheel going forward where you're eating, you're taking your blood sugar medicine, you're gaining more weight, you'll start to reverse some of that and the effects of your high blood sugar. So excessive fat, especially visceral fat, leads to higher blood levels of fatty acids, and fatty acids reduce glucose uptake, causing insulin resistance in skeletal muscle. So visceral fat is the fat that lies around your stomach. So if I mean, we're not all out the clear if you have fat legs, but when you look at the human body, if you're looking at a cadaver, there are different types of fat on our bodies. There's brown fat, there's visceral fat. The fat that lines our organs is the most harmful fat you can have. It's also the hardest fat to lose. So hats off to anybody that can lose that, right? The only thing that I have found that I have personally found successful is if I did intermittent fasting, which I've done a bunch of that and lost a bunch of weight. And that's not days without food. Like I don't eat for 14 hours and then I eat sensibly for the other 10. And that does seem to work. Physical inactivity, America has become progressively physically inactive, especially since we had the pandemic and everybody's working at home and we're all digital. Get outside, get moving. So physical inactivity in sedentary people accumulates triglycerides in their muscle cells. Triglycerides are the whole component behind cholesterol. The diet that we eat, high carbohydrate diets challenges the glucose lowering ability of a person with pre-diabetic and accelerates the development of type 2 diabetes. A high-fat, low-fiber diet, especially one that includes saturated and trans fats, causes dyslipidemia. Dyslipidemia is what you see when I am talking about shaking this blood back and forth and it's all floating up to the top, which worsens in insulin resistance and fosters type 2 diabetes. Now, I can tell on a diabetic patient how insulin resistant they are by how hard their fat tissue is. And when I'm talking hard, there are some poor people out there who have been so insulin resistant, it's literally rock hard. You can barely get a needle into it. It's that hard. It's hard to believe that can happen to the human body, but it's sclerosed. It's just become this hard, hard fat, I guess would be a better way, no other way to put it. But then think about what happens if I put insulin in there, because we're supposed to inject our insulin either into our stomach, into your leg, any place where you have fat. Well, then what happens is nothing's going to absorb from it because it's so hard. Nothing moves there. So that's another way that you can further insulin resistance. Next slide. The effects of stress on blood sugar. So cortisol, people who work nights, I was a night worker for 12 years. If you want to mess up your cortisol levels, that's a fantastic way to do it. Cortisol levels will make people gain visceral fat and fat around their stomach. Cortisol comes from that whole flight or fight constantly being activated. So cortisol elevates blood sugar levels in attempts to deliver glucose to muscles so as to fight the stressors. Cortisol levels are also affected by the fight or flight reaction. Now, the fight or flight reaction really is pure adrenaline, right? If I walked in here and screamed boo and you all got scared, we just released a whole bunch of adrenaline from your adrenal glands. So to put that into perspective, when I've taken care of patients, like say I had an open heart patient come up, they were having problems with their pressure, they put them on insulin, or they put them on a adrenaline drip, pure adrenaline, they'll put them on. And their blood sugars will go right through the roof. I will be chasing blood sugars, we call it in the hospital, all day long. I could take a blood sugar every 15 minutes and it's climbing by the hundreds because adrenaline messes with how your body uses insulin and how it uses glucose. So if you have a super stressful job or a super stressful life where things are always getting activated like that, that's a great way to make your cortisol levels shift in a direction they should not. People who are in a constant state of emotional and physical stress are continually in a mild state of inflammation. So stress, cortisol, and blood sugars are things that cause people's body to get inflamed. Now, I can think of one syndrome right off the top of my head that a lot of people are suffering from, and they go to the doctor and they're like, yes, you can take Lyrica and you can take this. And I'm not medication. I'm not bashing any pharmaceutical companies. But I can tell you, fibromyalgia was born from this. High sugars, inflammation throughout your body, you ache every day, everything hurts, nobody can figure out what the problem is. The problem is that you have inflammation running throughout your body, and every time you eat a bunch of sugar, you're feeding it because you're not using your sugar right. And it's super addictive too. Sugar is very addictive in that manner. So foods, injury, stress, and other disease processes can all cause chronic inflammation. So we have a marker in the hospital that we check for inflammation. It's called the CRP. So if you come in and we're like, I don't know what's wrong with this person, let's just do a CRP, and that CRP level is super elevated, well then they're like, well, let's start thinking about lupus, and let's start thinking about this and that, because it's sending a marker out saying that you have inflammation somewhere in your body, we just don't know where. So it's impressive when people are under a ton of stress and you do their blood work, their CRP level will be elevated, their white count will be elevated, and they'll have no other place where you could find infection. So I've seen that a lot on people. What factors can we control in our diet? How much fast food do we eat? I mean, if you want some high fat, low fiber, trans fatty acids, not a lot of nutrients, fast food's the way to go. How much pop or soda do you consume? What types of food do you eat? These are all things that we have control over. Nobody can control that for us. Do you snack a lot? Do you eat a lot of food that's prepackaged? So I was reading this book because I'm just super transparent. I like sugar. Like, it's great. I love chocolate. I love dark chocolate. I love chocolate of any form. And so I spent a year without eating chocolate, like a solid year. And then I started reading this book, now I'll have a little piece of it here and there, but I mean, it's very controlled, called 7 Ways to basically get off carbohydrates and sugars. And this lady said something in there that stuck in my brain. And it was this. She said, Americans go to the store and we buy food, but we really don't buy food. We buy food like substances. We buy food that was taken and morphed into something, and we call that food. Like a good bag of Cheetos, not food. And I mean, what's not to love about a bag of Cheetos? But it's a food-like substance. So not a lot of nutrition there. So, soda versus diet soda. This is my personal pet peeve because I am very much so anti, and I will say this, I'm very much so anti the fake sugar, the sweeteners, these sort of things. And part of the reason is one, they just don't agree with me. And 2, I don't think I've had one for like 20 years. I don't know, I had something inadvertently that had aspartame in it. And I'm like, why am I hungry? Like, I was like a ravenous animal. I would have eaten anything. And that is what it does to me. Like, and that's what it does to a lot of people. They'll get some sort of thing in there that's got a lot of sugar substitutes in it, and it just drives your appetite wild. So are we really helping ourselves? I don't know. So the daily consumption of diet soda was associated with 36 greater incidence of metabolic syndrome, which we'll talk about down the road, and 67% greater type 2 diabetes compared with non-consumption. So if you're drinking diet soda, basically what that's telling me is you have a 67% higher chance of developing some type 2 diabetes or having more complications with it. Diet additives in soda for some people are strong appetite stimulants, that's me, and soda pop, whichever part of the country you come from, contains high fructose corn syrup, which is a manufactured type of sugar. So high fructose corn syrup is a huge thing in the American diet. When you're looking at food in the grocery store, do you know how to tell like what's the most prominent ingredient in there? First one on the list. So I was looking at a can of baby formula the other day, and the very first thing in there was high fructose corn syrup. So, of course, little Jimmy's going to be 30 pounds when they're a year old. You're just pouring sugar down their throat. So now we're training these poor babies to have this craving for sugar. That's what satiates them. And it's training all their cells in their body and their insulin how to use sugar. So natural breast milk is sugary and it has carbohydrates in it, but to feed a baby that, high fructose corn syrup is in so many things that's manufactured, but it doesn't grow on any plants. So that's the important thing to remember. Okay, next slide. Things to think about when you're buying food. Is what you're buying in its natural state? Did you buy real food or a food-like substance? My favorite is people would always, my kids were in sports when they were little, and they're like, here's your fruit snack, and we'd throw it out in the car because it's, maybe got some fruit flavoring in it, it's a bunch of sugar. That's not me picking on any company, they're all the same. It's made with real fruit juice. Well, fruit juice has got an insane amount of carbohydrates in it as well. Is what you're eating based on calories and sugar versus the actual nutrients? So there are some really nutrient-dense foods out there that have a lot of calories. Avocados, they've got some calories in them, but they rock. And they're good for you. And they're a potent antioxidant. And I think I spend $100 a month on them. Between my kids and myself, it's out of control at our house. But everyone's eating avocados these days. How was your food actually grown? So you can get some really great real food, but if it's full of pesticides, I don't know what we're doing there. So what's happening when we eat high-starch food? Starches are made up of complex carbohydrates, which break down into simple sugars. Then when these carbohydrates break down into simple sugars, they are no different than common table sugar. So if you have a bowl of some sort of cereal in the morning and it's all carbohydrate-based, you are basically having a bowl of sugar. They cause blood sugars to spike just like regular sugar does. Foods that are high starch foods are breads, pastas, noodles, rice, all the good stuff that we like on a cold winter day. Potatoes, and I'm not saying you can't eat some of those, but you got to eat them in moderation. These foods are what is causing the high glycemic index. Those are all high on the glycemic index. If you go to the web and you put in high glycemic index foods, it'll just pages of it. Foods that are low on the glycemic index, vegetables, peppers, broccoli, tomatoes, lettuce, eggplants, strawberries, lemons, all these sort of things, chickpeas, beans. Did you know that chickpeas are hummus is another name for, you can make hummus. Yes, they're very good. So dark chocolate with more than 70% cocoa, which a lot of people don't like because it's bitter, but I don't mind it. Nuts, cashews, peanuts, all those sort of things. Super good for you. So this I found shocking. What the average American is eating per American Heart Association. I like American Heart Association because I do a lot of classes through them, so they kind of just lay it out straight. So American adults consume on average 17 teaspoons of added sugar every day, more than 2 to 3 times the recommended amount for men and women respectively. This adds up to 60 pounds of added sugar consumed annually, and that is 6 10-pound bowling balls of sugar. That's a lot of sugar. The numbers are even worse for children and young adults ages 2 to 19, especially now because people are drinking a lot of coffees, which have a lot of syrup in them. And syrup is probably, I bet you that syrup's just loaded with high fructose corn syrup, right? So what I've never understood, and I'm not against the coffee industry because I will have a cup of coffee in the morning, but it's so expensive when you have to buy it. First of all, if you took that money and invested it, you'd have a huge return. But secondly, there's 700-800 calories a piece. I mean, that's a lot of calories. If you're basing your diet on a 2,000 calorie diet a day, you've used up almost half of it just with a cup of coffee from some little joint. So American kids consume 66 grams of sugar a day, equaling over 53 pounds of added sugar per year. And then people wonder why their kids are hyper. Well, because we're feeding them a bunch of sugar, right? And I always wondered why, like, I would see people and they'd be like, oh, honey, you did such a great job. Here's a candy bar. Now you're teaching your kid that sugar is a reward. Yeah, you're training that brain to do some things it wasn't meant to do. So where is all this added sugar coming from? Fructose is a type of simple sugar that makes up 50% of table sugar, sucrose. So they kind of married those together. High fructose corn syrup is in everything, like I said, including baby formula. Not in every baby formula, but I've seen it in some. The American diet is full of added sugar, especially if you're drinking soda pop. So we don't really have a lot of soda pop in my house. When my kids were little, one of them went to school. It's like she was in kindergarten. She'd never had a pop. And she'd come home and she's like, Mom, I had some root beer today. And she was super excited about it. And I thought, oh, they wrecked my kid. But, I mean, sooner or later they are going to get exposed. But our kids don't really drink a lot of pop because they never were used to it as a child. I have seen people put pop in their kids' bottles. And then their teeth all rot out. Yeah, that's a terrible idea. So, how does sugar impact your body? So, fructose does not lower your hunger hormone ghrelin or stimulate fullness. So, you could eat sugar like gummy worms. That's a big one. I could eat bags of gummy worms and never feel full. I'd feel sick, but I wouldn't feel full. And they are good, especially the ones that are Sour Patch Kids. Let's not lie about that. The other question I asked one of the surgeons when I used to work in surgery, and he did gastric bypass. And I said, okay, here's the deal. I said, if we can suppress and manipulate all these other hormones in our body, right? You can manipulate a woman's body and she can produce 10 eggs and we can do all these weird things. Why can't you do something with the ghrelin hormone in your stomach? And no one has an answer for me. Like, if we're going to manipulate something, let's do that so we're not eating so much. So, let's see. One study in children, each daily serving of sugar-sweetened beverages was linked to a 60% increase in obesity. So how many kids are drinking pop and playing video games all summer long? A lot. Yep. So number 2, large amounts of sugar are turned into fat in your liver. Some of this gets shipped out as blood triglycerides, while part of it remains in your liver, and over time this can cause fatty liver disease. So fatty liver disease is no different than alcoholic cirrhosis. It's the same. With cirrhosis, your liver gets a little harder, but you can have non-alcoholic cirrhosis of the liver. And I would wholeheartedly believe that sugar plays a big factor in that. Sugar drastically increases that visceral fat or belly fat accumulation. Sugary soda is linked to insulin resistance, and it's a key feature in metabolic syndrome. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Sugar-sweetened beverages is one of the leading dietary causes of type 2 diabetes. So to put it in perspective, I'm half blind. If the entire population of the United States just started drinking soda, which the majority of Americans, a lot of them do, if you did that every day, 3.6 million people on average would develop type 2 diabetes annually. Now, there are probably that many people running around in the world, in the United States right now, that don't even know they have diabetes. Pop is everywhere. It wasn't like that when I was growing up. I mean, that was like, if you got a pop, and you had the world by the tail. But it's in every restaurant. You can go through drive-thrus. Like, it's everywhere. So, next slide. Sugary soda contains absolutely no essential nutrients. As a matter of fact, soda has a lot of things that rob your bones of phosphorus and calcium. And when people start going into renal failure, we tell them stop drinking soda because your phosphorus levels are going to be all over the place. Sugar is linked to causing leptin resistance, and leptin is the hormone produced by your body's fat cells, and it regulates the number of calories you eat and burn. Sugary soda may be addictive. I mean, I could even take the may out of there because I think there's a lot of people that go through some hardcore withdrawal. Sugary beverages may increase the risk of heart disease. It is well established that sugar-sweetened drinks increase your risk factors for heart disease, including high blood sugar, high triglycerides, and then the LDL, that's the bad cholesterol in your body. Soda drinkers have a higher risk of cancer, and I couldn't believe this when I read this, and I read this in a couple different spots. One study in over 60,000 adults discovered that those who drank 2 or more sugary sodas a day per week were 87% more likely to develop pancreatic cancer than those who did not. So I have seen a lot of pancreatic cancers in my career. And that is not the diagnosis that you want, for sure. Postmenopausal women who drink a lot of sugary soda may be at great risk for endometrial cancer, cancer of the inner lining of your uterus. The one thing I can say about reading stuff, and I'm not an oncology nurse, I wouldn't profess to be an oncologist, but I will say this, cancer loves sugar. It absolutely loves it. And they've actually done clinical trials where they've taken and they've mixed chemotherapy with D5, which is what you put in people's blood, like an injection or an IV, when you are having really low blood sugars. And they've mixed chemotherapy with that. Then they've given the patient a shot of insulin, so their blood sugar was really low. And they give them all that D5 with the chemotherapy drug in it, and those cancer cells go right for that. It's highly effective in treating cancer because cancer loves sugar. And they love sugar and it loves acid. So sugars and the acids in soda are a disaster for dental health. And there's a lot of dentists even in this community, like even after Halloween, they will pay kids to bring their candy in and just give it, they weigh it and they give them a certain amount of money for however much that they bring in. And I am amazed, we don't really trick or treat. We've always taken our kids to eat all-you-can-eat crap because I didn't want all the sugar laying around the house. Your kids are bugging off the wall. And then I tell them all year, don't talk to strangers. And now I'm going to take you to a strange person's house. That doesn't seem right. And I don't think it's a great holiday. So a lot of good reasons not to do it. While the acids in soda themselves can cause damage, it's the combination of sugar that makes the soda particularly harmful. So everybody's born with a certain amount of bacteria in your mouth. But when you drink soda, it just gets right in there down by the roots of your teeth in particular, where all the bacteria lie, and you're just feeding it. Sugar provides easily digestible energy for bad bacteria in your mouth. This combined with the acid damages enamel to your teeth over time. So we up here in the Midwest, and I'm not picking on anybody in the United States, but we up here in the Midwest have pretty nice teeth. There are certain regions of the United States, they don't get dental care at all. They drink Mountain Dew. No offense to that pop organization. Pop in general, they just drink soda, they drink pop before they drink water or milk or anything else. And it is noticeably obvious when you go to those communities because they don't have any teeth. It is not a normal aging process for your teeth to decay. They should be growing old with you just as much as any other part of your body. It's not a normal part of growing old. Soda drinkers have a drastically increased risk of gout. I don't know if anybody in here has ever had gout, but it's very painful. It usually affects your feet, sometimes your hands, like your toes. And what gout is, gout typically occurs when there's high levels of uric acid in your blood, and they become crystallized. And when you go to the doctor, they're like, stop eating meat because there's purine in meat or something which causes uric acid. It's coming from your pop. I mean, maybe you want to lay off the meat for a while, but it's probably coming from the pop. So one of the treatments for gout, they have certain medications, but another treatment when it's really out of control, because in healthcare, when in doubt, steroids, right? So if you want to drive someone's blood sugar through the roof, have a little steroid. So that does kind of fix gout, but it causes other problems. Fructose is the main carbohydrate known to increase uric acid levels. Consequently, many large observational studies have determined strong links between sugar-sweetened drinks and gout. Moreover, long-term studies tie sugary soda to a 75% increase of gout in women and almost a 50% increase of gout in men. Sugar consumption, this is the last one, is linked to increased dementia. So I'm clearly not a fan of sugar, right? And I'm not out to get anybody in the sugar industry, but it's very interesting to see when I was very young in my career and I was talking to one of the county coroners when I worked down in the metro, and I talked to them frequently. And she was really a very remarkable lady and just a wonderful teacher. And she's like, Kim, you don't have to worry about whatever I was worried about. She's like, sugar is what's going to kill America. She's like, you can come watch a bunch of autopsies if you want. I'll show you exactly what it does. And she was right. And that was 20-some years ago before diabetes was through the roof like it is now. And people were pre-diabetic and all those sort of things. And we are drinking more soda probably now than we ever have. diet, regular, all those sort of things. Next slide. That's just my high blood sugar and insulin resistance ultimate effects on your body. So diabetics are more prone to get glaucoma or other vision problems. Cellular damage, we talked about how the inside of your blood vessels and throughout your body gets damaged. Circulatory problems, increased comorbidities. What I mean by increased comorbidities, if you've got one thing wrong with you, you've got 3 other things following it, right? You're diabetic, your kidneys are failing, you just had stents in your heart. If you are suffering from coronary artery disease or blockage in your heart, everyone thinks, oh, they just have all these heart problems. It's not just your heart. You don't just develop atherosclerosis or coronary artery disease in one part of your body. You develop it everywhere. So if you have heart disease, you're more likely to have a stroke. You're more likely to have all kinds of other problems. I'm not saying that to scare people. I'm just super honest about it. Diminished ability to heal when you're injured. So diabetics that have surgery take longer to heal. They injure their foot, they cut themselves, those sort of things. It takes a while longer to heal. Increased medical complications when people do become ill. So we saw that with COVID, whatever your feelings may be on COVID, influenza, respiratory illness, whatever. When diabetics get sick, they get sicker than the average person does, especially if you're uncontrolled. Increased rates of cancer and increased rates of heart disease. Next one. Metabolic syndrome. This is the big one now that medical people are treating. So this is where doctors kind of get their rating and reimbursements come and all these sort of things when people go through and audit their charts. It is a real syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is defined as the presence of having 3 or more of the following. A waist greater than 102, that's centimeters, and in men, and 88 centimeters in women. A triglyceride level greater than 150. High density high density cholesterol less than 40, or greater than 40 rather, and greater than 50 in men. Blood pressure that's greater than 130 over 85, and a fasting glucose over 100. This is a great way, if you go to your physician, to get put on diabetes medication, to get put on a blood pressure pill, and then to get put on some cholesterol meds. And usually when they diagnose people who are with diabetes, type 2, type 1, type whatever, they get all 3 of them. Because they want tight control, because the studies are showing that it reduces the risk of all of these things that we just talked about. That's also a lot of medication to take. And every time you take medication, there are side effects. Next one. Treatments for metabolic syndrome, cholesterol medication, blood pressure meds, multiple types of diabetic medications and injectables, losing weight. What I have watched over the last, especially 5 years, the pharmaceutical companies have come out with a lot of, some of them are super impressive insulins. And insulin before was really hard to manufacture because a lot of it comes from the pancreas of mice or the pancreas of pigs. And who finds this out? I don't know. Someone on a lot higher pay scale than I am. And now they're coming out with these diabetic medications where you take a shot once a week and they're controlling your blood sugar. I think what they're gearing for is trying to help the people that can't get their blood sugar under control. So like, if we can make this, we'll do this for 1 week, and you only have to give yourself a shot 1 time instead of 3-4 times a day. I don't know how well that's going to work. So losing weight and the side effects of medication. Cholesterol medications have a lot of side effects. There's especially statins. And again, if you're on a cholesterol medication, I'm not here to tell people to stop taking your medication. That's between you and your doctor. But some people who are on those are having terrible muscle aches. They wind up going off of them. They can't take them at all. Certain types of blood pressure medications cause chronic diarrhea, or not blood pressure, blood sugar medications. Some people get on oral types of blood sugar medications and they just have terrible diarrhea from it. And terrible just nausea all the time. So that's something to think about too. Next slide. What can you do to help improve your blood sugar? There's hope for us, guys. We're going to do this. Stop eating sugar and carbs. Before, remember in the 80s? I grew up in the 80s and it was a rockin' good time. I remember watching the diet fads and they're like, get rid of protein, start eating carbohydrates and carb this, and then they found that the Americans were at an average 10 to 20 pounds heavier than they were before they started the diet. Yeah, right there. And then the beef corporations kind of took over, and they're like, beef, it's what's for dinner, and they started doing all these ads, right? We know, we were there. Get carbohydrates from natural food sources. Believe it or not, I like fruits, but they have a lot of carbs in them. If you're really having problems with your blood sugar, they pack a lot of punch. Exercise, get moving. It changes how your body utilizes sugars, simple sugars, and insulin becomes more effective. Drink water. Don't drink anything flavored. Put a little cucumber in your water. Put a little lemon in there. Give it a little zing. Increase protein in your diet, which sometimes is not easy to do because meat at the store is expensive. Thankfully, we live in a community where there's a lot of farmers. So, I mean, if ever anybody here needs to know, like, where can I buy beef? I got people I buy beef from all the time. So, and then lose weight, especially in the abdominal area. And everybody's body reacts to losing weight in a totally different way. So don't get frustrated. I mean, I've spent years frustrated trying to lose weight, and people have to figure out what works for them in that aspect. Some people, when you have problems with insulin resistance and insulin in your body, you go out and work out. It is like taking some sort of steroid and you just start packing on muscle. I am that person. So I know what that feels like, because you're like, I just sweat at the gym for an hour for the umpteen days in a row, and I have 5 pounds heavier. What this is pointless. I've actually seen certain bodybuilders will abuse insulin so that they pack on muscle. So there used to be a guy when I first started in nursing, and I never forgot this. I mean, he was ripped, like shredded. And he would take fast-acting insulin and drop his blood sugars down into the 20s, 30s, like most people would pass out, and then he'd go to the gym and work out. But what he was really doing was setting himself up to really have a weight problem when he got older, because now he's taken how his body uses insulin and how his cells respond to it, and he's completely just taught him a whole different method. So, not a good idea. Next slide. Everything in moderation. So the Bible talks about everything in moderation, and if ever there was a time that we live in this world where we have lost perspective, and I'm not saying you guys all have, but there just seems to be a lot of loss of perspective on what moderation really is. Like, where's the balance in life? You know, when God created the universe, he did such an amazing job that all of our planets are always in balance. And we don't have to worry about them coming out of balance. And our body is his own ecosystem in that whole entire regards to it. And it has its own balance and function if we fuel it properly. Humans are designed to eat food that was grown from the land. So I'm all about bringing back the farm to the table. I'm all about if you can grow it and it's, you know, you're not putting a bunch of pesticides on it, do it, because it will be much better than anything that you could ever get from the store. You know, I think there's a huge rise and a huge movement right now in our nation for people to start canning again and doing all these sort of things. And I see it. And I do it myself. I've always done it, though, just because I like to know what's in my food. Humans are also designed to be physically active. So in other countries, like in Europe and across the pond, so to speak, they don't have the weight problem Americans do. But our government allows all kinds of stuff to be put in our foods that they don't allow over there. So that is another reason that you should try to do farm from table, grow your own food, get it from a locally sourced place. Humans were designed to live without addiction and to trust God, and food is very much so an addiction. And what's hard about food is you can't quit food. I mean, you can quit other addictions, but you literally can't be like, I'm cold turkeying it for the next 6 months. We're done. I'm done. It doesn't work like that. So it's finding that balance in there of how to fuel your body and feel your best. And it seems like once you get the pendulum going in the right direction, right? It takes me about 3 weeks to a month if I'm on a good exercise kick and I'm eating right. Like, I'm on it. And I can stay on that for a super long time. And I think that's kind of human nature, but maybe, I don't know, like, I don't know how it works for you guys, but people need to have a support system to eat good. You need to plan out your meals. I don't really like love to cook. It's not my thing. I cook a lot because my kids eat a lot and they're always hungry. But I would much prefer to know that I made their dinner. They didn't go someplace and get it, and they'll go out to eat here and there with their friends. And I do a lot of meal planning. I order my groceries. I'm a creature of habit, right? So sometimes when you can get into those sort of routines, you can save yourself a lot of extra stress and pressure down the road. I don't want to see any more people develop diabetes. Our nation has shifted in such a manner that it's a pill to fix everything, or a shot or this or that. And if you need it, you need it. Like, you can't skip out on your diabetic medications unless you can get that to start reversing itself, and under the care of a physician, you can start weaning it back. I've taken care of people who have I'm done being diabetic, and there's a whole population out there that does that too. It never finishes good. These are the people that wind up in the ketoacidosis, breathing all funny, passed out on the floor, because their brain might be telling them one thing, but their body's not responding to it. So, things happen in baby steps, right? And we lose control of this healthy, functioning body that we had when we were born by the things that we put into it. And there's natural processes of aging, but will age yourself a lot quicker if you don't take care of yourself. So those are things to think about. And I think summertime is the greatest time to eat the healthiest food because it's everywhere. So stop and think about that. So I don't have too much else unless you do.
We just got some questions.
Okay, fire away.
A couple questions came in. One of them has to do with many times when people are using meth or heroin or different things like that, and then they just suddenly come off of it and they're in treatment. They're like craving sugar through the roof. I've seen people go buy mango juice and drink a whole carton at one thing, because they just used meth 3 days before and they were up for 3 days or whatever. And do you have any advice in recovery regarding how to build back normality? Because the Bible says the word sober, when you look it up, does not mean to be without a drug, even though we shouldn't add a drug to our life, but it means to be well balanced. And you just talked about that. To bring our body back into balance will help bring our brain back into balance. Do you have any advice regarding that?
So part of the problem when I'm taking care of meth patients or people are using meth is everything that's stored in your liver, that 10% of blood sugar that's stored there. When people are doing meth, and for those of you who have done meth, you may not remember this part of it, but you are on a metabolic marathon. Like, the last person I took care of that I intubated, I could not keep up with him. I gave him 3 liters of fluid. He was constantly, parts of his body was moving I didn't even think he could move. Like, he was flexing muscles here, all involuntary. Well, you're just taking any amount of sugar that you had stored and you're burning through it like wild. It's like a wildfire of sugar in your body. So what you have to do is, first of all, you have to hydrate yourself, because I've never taken care of anybody overdosing that's not just sweating like wild. And that's your body trying to get rid of the toxins. Secondly, you got to get your sugar from a source that is not high fructose corn syrup. Lots of things like mango fruit. A lot of these juice drinks that say 100% natural, start reading the label, because ain't nothing natural about that. So the thing that you want to do is start eating things like, eat some grapes, eat those sort of things. They're not going to satiate you, but force yourself into that so your body starts to use it from a natural source. But you'll see that even like at AA meetings, they'll have just tons of sugar there. And I love AA meetings. I think it's a great program. But you'll see that with people who have been in recovery for a long time. Your liver is not used to storing normal sugar. Your liver is not used to using sugar like it should, because you're getting sugar from either alcohol or you've used it all up with methamphetamines. And people, when you see people who have done meth just hardcore, they're usually thin. Sometimes I'll see some people that are not, but it's because it's like you do a bunch of meth and it's like running 10 miles because they're constantly moving. So you're going to have to find a way to reload that sugar in your body, but I would not be doing it by eating a bunch of candy, I'd be doing it by eating a banana, or just bananas are loaded with carbohydrates. Eat some avocados, high in carbohydrates. Those are the things you want to put in there, and you might not feel overtly satiated, but you're not going to feel great after you come down from a meth high anyways, and people don't feel good after that. I mean, they're sleeping for days on end, right? So that would be my solid advice, is go to the all natural source. Don't eat sugar, stay away from all those taffy candies and everything that's made from sugar. So
other question that came in has to do with, like, if you have uppers like caffeine, and you're doing like Monster drinks on an empty stomach especially, or things like that, and you jack everything way up, then when you drop way low, and then it's very difficult to get back to normal, and then you do it again the next day. To just go off of that, because this is the habit. The question was, is there a slow way to do it, or you just cut it?
Well, I mean, I'm not a fan of any of those energy drinks, and this is a big answer, because it messes with your heart. You can't dump all of that in there. I have seen so many terrible rhythm problems from people. I'm shocking them. I'm giving them meds. Their heart rate's 210 because it's an overstimulant. You can't keep stimulating your body like that. But if you're going to quit it, and you're super addicted to it, you got to eat the elephant in the room, like one bite at a time, right? Cut down so your body's not in such terrible shock. One day drink 3/4 of a can. The next day drink a half a can. The next day drink 1/4 of the can, until you're off of it, and then replace that with something. Replace it with water. Replace it with, some sort of drink that's got vitamins in it, but it's not full of any other chemicals. And there are actually some good companies out there right now that make like protein drinks that are full of vitamins and stuff, but they don't have any of the other additives in it. That's what you need to get your hands on, because you're going to miss this motion. Like I did something at work. I had a little drink of Monster. I did this, that, and the other. Energy drinks, especially in people under the age of 21, are a nightmare. And and I've caught my kids drinking them, and it's been ugly. And it's only because I care. I mean, I'm honest about it. I know people that drink 2-3 of them a day, and I don't know how they do that, because for every 1 cup of caffeinated substance that you drink, you're peeing out 1 cup of your body fluids. So you're constantly running dehydrated. So your poor kidneys are trying to filter, and they don't have enough fluid to filter out the gunk. It's hard on your body.
Yeah. Is there questions here? I will pass the mic. Here we go.
Getting back to the dementia, have you heard they're saying now that dementia is type 3 diabetes? Have you heard that?
I have not heard that. But I'm sure that I don't know, I can go look it up. But that is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's what I've read. They're saying it's affecting your brain the same way it affects everything else, having too much insulin.
Right. Well, your brain and your blood-brain barrier have your CSF fluid that runs from your brain all the way down your spine, always has higher sugar than the rest of or has sugar in it. The rest, I think it's like 65 or so. And once it falls below that, then that's when people start going into diabetic comas. I know, if somebody came in with really bad facial fractures, and let's say they're just leaking fluid out of their ear, I'll know right away if they ripped their dura in their brain, because I can just check it with a blood sugar machine and it'll show up. If it was a runny nose, there's no sugar in that. So, but no, I'm sure that probably is a big component of it, to be honest with you, because it's people who are especially not controlling their sugar, they're up, they're down, they're up, they're down. That's hard on the brain. It's hard on your body.
One other thing, what do you think of the idea, when we're born, we're 75, 80% water, and as we get older, we get less, we have less fluids on board. Do you think all this disease and, blood sugar is measured, if you have
Milligrams per deciliter, yeah.
Right, so if you had more water in your blood, your blood sugar would be down.
It will be some, but it's not a permanent fix. So we have a saying in the land where I work, and that is the solution to pollution is always dilution. Because if you did a whole bunch of cocaine or methamphetamine, there's no reversal agent for that, so the only thing I can do is dilute it. I will give people who are diabetic 2-3 liters of fluid, and their blood sugar will drop a couple hundred points if they're up in the 400s and 500s usually, because they're already dehydrated. And the reason that they're dehydrated is because their kidneys is trying to kick that sugar out because the insulin's not working right, so they've peed off all their extra. They just, do you know what I'm saying? And I think, and this is my own theory, that a lot of people, once they get into their elder years, don't drink as much because they don't want to get up at night to go to the bathroom as much, or they don't want to be bothered with going to the bathroom. I'm telling you, drink the water. It's worth it. You know, I can't speak highly enough. And I don't understand not loving water because I love to drink water. And I will drink a gallon of it a day. I think it's great. But not everybody's like that.
Yeah, I'll come around here.
I'm gonna say this the best as I can.
Okay.
So coffee and pop is both not healthy, but is coffee more healthier than pop?
So coffee generally tends to be very acidic. And I've read both. The problem that I have with coffee is you're putting a stimulant into your body. When you stimulate your body, then you start to mess with the sugars in your body because you're ramping up the system. It's like revving up the engine of a car. You use more gas. So I personally think it throws stuff off. The other thing is, and I didn't touch a ton on this, there's some research out there that's saying that people who don't sleep well at night have a higher incidence of having high blood sugar. So whether we think coffee keeps us up at night or not, we could sit here and split that hair forever. I actually do think that I actually think it doesn't shut off your whole entire brain if you're drinking caffeine substances all day.
So both of them?
I mean, I'm not telling you what to do, but if
I
I
was just wondering because I actually tried to limit my sugars because I'm pre-diabetic and wow, it's hard.
It is. Sugar is addicting as
It's
heroin.
really hard because I remember myself as a little girl. I want sugar. I want this. I want that. I got taught that sugar was a treat.
Right.
And I would get sugar cereals.
Right.
And now I'm just like, Mom, why did you do that to me?
Right. Right.
But it's not her fault. I just said no.
Well, you have to retrain yourself to like, if I quit eating this and I do this, then this is my reward. I go get my nails done. I get my toenails painted. I go find a book I like to read.
It's
It's
really
super hard. The first time I quit eating sugar cold turkey, I laid on the couch and cried for like 3 days straight. My kids were little at the time, and I'm like, I'm dying because it felt so terrible. And I just felt like I just couldn't get any energy. But I did it. I made it. I made it through that. It's like 72 hours of torture, and then it gets better. So I did, and I limit my sugar. I mean, I'll have some here and there, but if I didn't limit my sugar, I'm the kind of person, like, if you make one pan of brownies, if I eat one, I'll eat the whole thing. Because, you know, one's too many and 1,000's not enough.
So another question that had come in over the week was how sugar affects your emotional state.
Ooh.
Because there's been people who have been diagnosed with like bipolar or different mental illnesses, which basically is saying the organ of your brain is suffering, just like your organ of your kidney can. And so can you address just the emotional state with it?
So because sugar is so very, very addictive, and then people with insulin resistance, they have high blood sugar, and then all of a sudden their body just produces a whole bunch of insulin and their blood sugar drops. You'll see people get real moody. I've seen people cry over it. I have some kids with really fast metabolisms, and when their blood sugar drops, I'm like, whoa, we need to get some food here. So it definitely does affect your emotions. How people eat, and when you look at athletes and you look at people that are at the gym and they're all buff, they're in tune to that piece of it all. And somehow along the way, some of us that are struggling forgot to tune in. Like we forgot to tune into that part of our body and say, oh, I need to do this for me. Like right now, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to have a piece of lean chicken. I'm going to have a salad. I'm going to have something like this. because it's really so much easier, especially if we're on the run, to shove a candy bar in your mouth. So then you're way back up again, but you're gonna fall way back down because your body's gonna produce all that. So you'll see people with irregular sleeping patterns, they get more moody. You'll see little kids have behavioral outbursts. A lot of times, you see these kids and all of a sudden they can't sit still and they're super mad, they gotta run. Just cut the sugar out of their diet. Just cut, and they go through withdrawals too. So.
Yeah.
I got a question. When I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and then started to bring my numbers down, they weren't super high to start with, they were less than 200. And then he wanted to get me down, the doctor did, and I did it for several years, but then I started to think about some supplements. And then right after I started to think about that, I got a call from my pharmacist, and she was wondering, I didn't have any prescriptions to it. She says, I'm just wondering, you've been on metformin for quite a while, are you having any reactions, bad reactions? And I says, well, no, I didn't read that sheet that told me all of that.
Yeah, I get it.
And so, but I said, I don't want you to tell me either.
Right.
Because I'll start thinking about them. And, but I said, I do have a question. And I says, what do you think of some supplements? I see there's some that they say work. And she said, well, I don't think it would be bad. It's hard for her to say that because
Right.
she's in the medical field to sell them. So I did. I went on supplements. I had my appointment with my doctor, and I told him I was weaning myself off. I'm going to try supplements. That was 3 years ago.
Good on you. Yeah.
And now I'm taking 2 bilberine pills and then a caloric cinnamon pill twice a day, one each time, twice a day. And my numbers have been running around 120 and lower.
Good.
Not consistent, depending on what I'm eating.
Right.
But I'm way lower than, because I don't test or have AC1 to go by. But just looking at my numbers and figuring the average, I'm, a lot of times in a month I'm 117. So that's a real good thing, isn't
That's a
it?
great thing. I mean, and again, I'm not telling anybody to quit your diabetes meds and try that. But if you're going to try it, make sure your physician knows and make sure you research your supplement. Because not all supplements that you buy have this. You can get one with 50 milligrams of something in it, and the next one's not the same. Depends, especially if you're ordering them from out of the country. So there's some good nutritionists in this area, and there's some really good people that sell supplements in this area. I would highly recommend going to somebody like that. Even if it just changes your numbers and you're still taking a little diabetic med, but you're not taking as much. And I've seen people do that with walking, and then their weight starts to shift. And it's like this whole, and I've seen people that were diagnosed type 2 diabetics lose 50, 60 pounds, and they're not diabetic anymore. So it is a thing. You can do it.
Yep.
That's the beauty of type 2 diabetes. If you catch it early enough, you can reverse it.
One of the things that I did when I was researching, because I didn't know anything about it, I just started to look and I'd grab well, this looks good and this looks good, but how do you know?
Right.
So when I went to a supplement store, I went in and I asked them, I says, I hear you have some diabetic supplements. Yeah. So I didn't ask them about either one of those products. They just took me over to the section and I says, what ones do you sell to seem to people say like work
Right.
and seem, sell more of? And she pointed to the 2 that I had been researching.
Good.
Then when I switched to getting my supplements at the vitamin shop, I went in and asked them the same thing, even though I'd been taking them and effective, and they said the same thing. So that's what.
There is a tremendous amount of research out there and people taking cinnamon for a supplement, and it does do great things for your blood sugar. So I haven't researched that out a lot. I just know a lot of people that have done it, and it's worked. So
My doctor wasn't very happy.
no, they usually aren't.
So is there any other questions? It's a perfect opportunity to. I just want to say that I'm just very thankful for all this information and that it's going online. So, because sometimes you'll listen to this and it's like, okay, I'm trying to retain that all. Go back and watch it again. And there is something about what we've been learning on Wednesday nights about being self-aware. If you eat mindlessly, if you watch TV mindlessly, if anything just becomes mindless, then you're not self-aware. But when you start paying attention, what happens is sometimes we'll go into grieving because we've gotten ourselves into a problem, right? Maybe we were drinking for years or there was something going on that now, if I'm self-aware, if I do that, then I'm going to have to face that, and that's going to cause me to grieve. So we'll say tomorrow. I'll get to that tomorrow. And it's really important that we become self-aware today. Where are you at emotionally? Where are you at physically? Where are you at spiritually? Because one day we will leave this little crate we're living in. It's just dirt and water. And we got to know where we're at spiritually, don't we? And but the more that we just are like running from ourselves, the less then that we'll be able to take care of ourselves. And one person can get up in the morning and eat an apple, and that can be something that doesn't agree with somebody else, right? Our bodies work a little bit differently, so we have to do that self-care and figure out, yeah, that's right, who am I? Can I cyclical fast, and when? And all of those types of things. So really important. Here's the other thing that had been questions that had come in. And I see this all the time as I teach healing schools and things like that, is there is something about if you've seen a healing, like say, we had it where someone's leg grew out. It was too short, and it grew out right there. They went back, doctor verified it was like, in fact, they had a shoe that made it where it was a lift shoe, right? And they couldn't wear it after that because now their leg was long enough. So we've seen these miracles, and so we'll hear about the miracles, and we'll be a part of that, and we believe in prayer. How many of you believe in the healing power of God and prayer? But faith without works is dead, and this is where I see people will ignore all that and feel like, that's okay, I'll just pray. Kind of like we have that silly notion that if we eat a bunch of sugar, but if we eat a salad following, the salad cancels it out. I don't know who started that, but wouldn't it be sweet if you just had a head of lettuce, you'd eat whatever you want and just be like, eat the lettuce, cancel it right out. But there's something that we do spiritually that says I can harm myself, but then I'll just pray. See, and then if it doesn't, we don't have the reaction. I don't know why God's not healing me. Well, we're a part of it. And if we've hurt ourselves, we repent. I'm sorry, Lord. Where I hurt myself, just to be upfront, I was sharing with somebody today, was in the 80s. They came out with a lovely little pill called Dexatrim. And there were some other trims that came out, and they hadn't had anything like that before. And I was a high schooler and decided I'll just take one. And I was like, ooh, I got energy, I've never liked coffee, so that wasn't a thing for me or anything like that. But I had energy, and it curbed my appetite. The more it curbed my appetite, the more energy I felt like I had, the more I took, right? And it jacked my metabolism. And next thing you know, I was a speeder. I had to have speed. And I'd sit in school and just shake, and I'd be twirling my hair and just, And so we've done things. They didn't come out and tell us. Like, they came out with monster drinks, and later they're like, hey, by the way, I don't want to watch out for that now that you've been doing that for 5 years. That's just how it works in the Food and Drug Administration. So we create a problem so that we can cure a problem. So we have to know there's a wicked system, and we have to be self-aware. Right? So I'm not saying let's not pray. If you're here tonight and you're like, I want agreement in prayer when it comes to, the blood sugar stuff. Maybe you're hyperglycemic, maybe you're too much, not enough, or it doesn't really matter. God is the healer. But whenever we pray, he can lift that and cause the body to start acknowledging things. But I see it very rare on certain things like this when we have such a part to causing it. I'm not saying he doesn't heal it, but God knows thank you. And we walk out the door and like, hey, let's go to Dairy Queen, and it doesn't work that way. Amen. Let's stand. If you're here today and you want agreement and prayer, and we can just do it right where you're at, for the Lord to just show you how to better take care of you. Like, what's the first thing? So what'll happen is sometimes we'll watch this or we'll hear this and you kind of go like that, and then it gives you this feeling like all or nothing. Remember, addictive behavior is all or nothing. Immaturity is all or nothing. So now we got to go home and do everything that she said. No, we just need to be aware and then say, God, what's that next thing I got to work on? Yeah? Silly little one that might seem easy for you is sometimes I have to make myself take a nap. God will say, you need a nap. And I'm like, oh, I still feel like a little kid. I don't want doing a nap. But, then I lay there and my toes are twitching and my brain's going through all the stuff. But God's telling me to take a nap. So then I do some self-talk. Like, listen, brain, that stuff will be there when you wake up. Don't worry about it, And I just kind of release that. And then when I'm out, I'm out. I now know that I snore. I never used to. I don't know if that's an age thing or whatever, but my grandkids will be like, you fell asleep on the couch. And then they'll give the big story. And you're like, I'm like, oh, okay. But that's when I know I really hit the sleep because I only do it when I'm really tired. But if I don't pay attention to myself, I don't know that I'm really tired. See, that's me you might just be fine in that area. But God, show us. Father, show us that thing that we can do differently. That thing from the knowledge that was taught here tonight, Lord God, that we can just make an adjustment and not try to do all or nothing, but tomorrow make an adjustment. And if you add something to it, sure, Lord, we'll do that too. We're willing and we're obedient and we submit to you because we want the fullness of healing. But we also declare right now, by the power and the blood of Jesus and by his stripes, we are already healed. So body, even if doctors have said, well, you're too far gone, it's too much, too little, too late, we're not going to believe that. I believe that when Jesus, those stripes were given to him, it covered it all. So we choose to be self-aware and we choose to believe in you, Lord God, that you're going to take care of this temple. And we are the under-shepherds to this temple. You're over us, and we just work here. We're allowed to live in this for a while. Thank you, Lord, for the temple we have. That's the other thing I just want to encourage you. Have you ever said something nice to your body? Do you ever notice if something's bugging you, like people say, I got a bum knee, that you talk trash to it? Now, you don't want to, if you're a believer in healing, you don't want to talk too much trash, because there's a limit or whatever. But you may, come on, and we start getting like a disgust toward that area. I've been trying to practice this too, and just talk to my body like, hey, you're all right. Coming with me today. I'm going to go some places, and I'll try to take care of you. Calm down, you'll be okay. I love you. I'm saying this because on Wednesday nights, we deal with mental, emotional, spiritual issues. And if you can't look in the mirror and say, I love you, without getting a disgusted feeling, that's an area to work on. I love you enough to pay attention to you. I love you enough to hear you. Your body needs to be heard. It's like, hello, I'm trying to tell you something, red flag. And you're like, shut up, I'm trying to eat cake, or whatever it is. So we turn our hearts, Lord God, in that repentant way in the name of Jesus. And if you have any questions, and maybe you want to just shoot at Kim, she'll be up at the front here with me. Or if someone needs agreement prayer, thank you so much for coming out tonight. God bless you. We'll be on again next week dealing with all forms of grieving. Yeah.